Hello everyone, welcome to the BFI London Film Festival 2021 and welcome to Community Camera Filmmaking Collectives. I don't know why I looked up at the screen, I know what it's called. But yes, it's lovely to see you all here and on a Sunday morning. Thank you for getting out of bed. I know I struggled with it a bit, but it's lovely to see you all. And today we're going to be talking all things to do with working as a collective when it comes to making films and also exhibiting films, and basically what the power of that can be, what some of the challenges of it can be practically, and how that can tie into a much wider question of representing all of the communities of the UK richly and accurately on screen. These are all questions that have been really, really important for filmmaking since almost the first film, really. But in the last few years, they've gained an added sort of relevance with social justice movements, really bringing to the forefront questions of who gets to speak, who has the power behind the camera, and why and how that matters. So alongside that, we've also seen collective filmmaking, which again has a very long and rich history that we'll get into, really rise to kind of become a hot topic in the last year or so, especially in sort of the world of arts more generally. We've sort of seen the Turner Prize this year have a shortlist that's made up of all artist collectives for the first time in its history. So again, these are issues that have had a long running relevance, but especially now, I think are going to be really rich and really rewarding to get into. And I'm very excited to be getting into that with a wonderful panel. So to my left, yes, that's right, I'm joined by Brian Dixon. Brian is an artist filmmaker, arts educator, and is also director of Amber Film and Photography Collective based in Newcastle. Amber was set up in 1968 with the aim of documenting working class voices in the northeast of England and the marginalised lives and landscapes within the region. Since then, they've grown to run their own gallery and cinema to showcase the work that the local community have also made. I'm also joined by Isra Al-Kassi. Isra is one of the founders of Tape Collective, who are dedicated to highlighting films from filmmakers with underserved backgrounds through screenings, events, and much more. Earlier this year, they programmed a season here at the BFI called But Where Are You Really From?, which was a month-long program looking at mixed heritage identity on screen. They've also worked with organisations and institutions including movie and cinemas across the country, including Exeter Phoenix and the Hyde Park Picture House in Leeds, and we'll be talking a bit about that kind of work later on. And finally, he is running slightly late, but we've all seen what the tube's been like these last few weeks, so no hard feelings. We will be joined by Trevor Matheson. So Trevor is an artist working primarily with audio and digital media, but he's also been a member of a number of really important artistic collectives, including Flow Motion and Black Audio Film Collective. So you might have heard of some of their works, like Handsworth Songs and Signs of Empire. He's also a co-founder of Dub Morphology and works as a composer in conjunction with his artistic practice. So I am very, very excited to be joined by currently this incomplete panel, but already a very exciting one, soon to be made even more enriching and rewarding. So, like I said, there's a lot that we'd love to get into, and there will be time for questions at the end. So, if you do have any, please do keep them in mind, and we will have time to get into those. But to start with, I kind of wanted to talk a bit about the work that each of you do and why you felt that working to increase that sort of community representation in your own way and with the specific communities you work with was something that needed doing, and why you sort of felt drawn to it. So, Brian, could we start with you? Could you talk a bit about Amber and why you wanted to get involved with it?
Yeah, so I think it's probably worth starting at the beginning with Amber. So the collective began in 1968. They actually met in London as students, and they were formed around the idea of the Murray Martin, who was the founder member, who sadly died in 2007. They were, at the core, they were artists who were from working class backgrounds, and their motivation was to return to the communities that nurtured them. So there was they were joined by a Finnish photographer, Circa Lisa Kontonen, who is still currently a director at Amber, also who and they Murray was originally from Stoke-on-Trent, as you may know. That's an area of the country called the Potteries. They went around various different parts of the country to choose somewhere to work, and they ended up in Newcastle. So something about that area, the architecture, the industrial landscape, the people, and they decided to base themselves there. So it was this, as documentarians, they were motivated by the desire to document, to start collecting from very early on. The vision was about creating, collecting, and preserving these stories and experiences. So that really was the onus. It was about returning to the communities and telling those stories that existed there. And I think as that pursuit has gone on and gathered momentum, it's ended up a vast and UNESCO accredited archive of work, films and photographs, which the value of which is widely acknowledged now. So I think, you know, the motivation is always personal motivation for myself as a filmmaker, for filmmakers that I meet, and over time this becomes the value and the worth and the depth of the work begins to reveal itself. That's quick, as quick as I can be.
Isra, can you talk a bit about sort of what Tape's kind of mission is and why you felt drawn to kind of doing that work?
Sure. So Tape was founded when Angie and I, the co-founder, we met as young Barbican programmers, which was a scheme that started 6 years ago. We were part of the first cohort. And it was great, you know, we were taught loads and we were sort of given loads of opportunities in terms of we were given space and a budget, and there were so many things established already and in place for us to be able to just curate slots or seasons in a festival, and someone would do everything for us. You know, there was a tech team, there was space, there was budget, there was a press team. And it was just the fact that, so Angie and I, it turns out that we both were based in South London, so we'd commute back from our workshops, and we were excited about the work we were doing at the Barbican as young programmers, but there was still sort of a moment where we're like, I feel like we could do more. And I feel like we could do something that's more sort of just more nuanced and more detailed and sort of really nitty gritty in terms of the stories we want to, or the sort of work we want to do. And I think 6 years ago, the sort of discussion around representation was, you know, people would get really excited if there's, you know, one black lead in a mainstream sort of film, and we were just like, there's so many more nuanced stories to tell. And so we just wanted to keep it really South London, and we wanted it to be in sort of makeshift spaces. And one of the things we're really mindful of is space, and how do we take over space, and what is inclusive spaces. Because I think sometimes people think that being inclusive or accessible are sort of few things like ticket prices or, you know, what sort of film you're showing, but actually there's more to it. We want to create a space for conversations, and sort of, so what we do is more sort of cross arts. And as part of that conversation, it's also about this idea of who gets to decide what's good and what's not good, and who gets to decide that this film is not worthy of it, you know. I mean, a lot of the work we sort of do is challenging distribution in terms of the films that get shown in cinemas and get picked up by cinemas, and why it's really important to then pick up on films for festival circuits or films that didn't even make it into a festival, and create the space for it to say, we think this is valid because there's a story here, and maybe the people that decide where the film goes don't understand the story. So yeah, it's very much about sort of challenging the sort of mainstream of cinema.
Amazing. And Trevor, we were just talking about sort of the work that everyone on the panel does and why they feel sort of drawn to it, and why they sort of want to create sort of that representation within the industry through their own work. So I was wondering if, as well as anything else you sort of want to say, as like you've been introduced, people know who you are, but if there is anything you'd like to say, feel free.
No,
but that's kind of what we're.
It starts out with a friendship of a group of people found the opportunity of working together beneficial, and the medium was film. From enjoying watching films to the point of actually saying you can make films now, and taking the full advantage of that, but doing it in such a way that we all bring our own skill base to the table, and enjoyment and pleasure and sharing in that. That's what the Black Audio outfit was about, in a sense. Taking full advantage of the situation that with the GLC and the funding of different workshops, the setting up of Channel 4 and all the other sort of theatre groups, other sort of collectives that were around at that time. So it's like a rich soil of cultural production was around us. So that's also the colleagues and friends that we had to engage with as well, across different sort of regions.
Wonderful. And I think, as you can probably tell, there's so many different approaches and ways of working within just this panel, let alone sort of across the country. But I think a question that's really coming up, and it should have come up a lot earlier, and it has so much space to discuss, is sort of the question of representation and why does it matter and how can we work to bring it about. And I think in a sense that can kind of be its own very interesting, very lengthy panel discussion. There's a lot to be said on that. So what I'd like to do is kind of talk a bit more about kind of the practicalities of actually that representation, like working with communities and trying to tell their stories. And a way that I sort of want to get into this is when you're sort of working with a community, whether that's a community you belong to yourself, or it's someone who you're working with them to tell their story, how do you each sort of make sure that those people aren't just represented, they're just not just in front of a camera, but actually that they have sort of agency and that they feel empowered by the work that you're doing with them or for them, rather than just sort of kind of ticking a box to say, look, we've got these people on camera. I guess who wants to sort of take that on?
I can talk about, there's many, because Amber's work it's indelibly connected to communities and many different communities in the Northeast. And it always arose out of personal relationships with community members, either individuals or groups. And it involved this longitudinal embedding in communities, whether it was the Sequel community in Linemouth in Northumberland, which was part of a film called Sequel in 1985, or it was communities in North Shields. Amber adopted a number of different strategies to be part of the community, and it was from buying a pub and a chapel in North Shields to serve as a base for communing and generating stories, to creating writers' workshops in housing estates. There were multiple ways of engaging with communities as the collective developed. So all of those were designed to create an authentic relationship of trust from which would blossom the creativity. And the involvement of the community has always been integral, and that idea of agency has also been integral to the practice, insofar as writing has been developed. Crewing of the films that were made was part of it. It got to a point where Amber was so involved in the communities that stories would come in from the community. Community members would approach Amber for new ideas for new stories. Such was that connection, and that's really how many different aspects of the production organically developed. So in North Shields, there was a 7-year residency, which was a number of photographs and film works. The same was in the Easington area of East Durham, which is shown in the clip there, which came from obviously the time of the miners' strike and beyond. But the stories that were developed then were not only about what was happening at the time, and Amber were involved in creating a current affairs unit to contribute to the actual understanding of what was going on the ground, which wasn't being reported in by mainstream media, to then looking and talking about the aftermath of what happened to the communities, and that became a trilogy of feature films called the Coalfield trilogy. And that engagement still goes on today with individuals and families and etc.
So it sounds like some of the themes there are like trust and empowering communities to do more than just be in front of the camera, but to work behind it, and also sort of that time that you're mentioning. It's not, you can't drop in and say, we're filming this for a week, come and sort of tell us your stories and then disappear.
Yeah.
It sort of needs that longer term engagement.
Yeah.
What about you, Isra? How, within tape, how do you sort of make sure that it's not just sort of representation for the sake of it, but that it actually means something to the people involved?
Well, first of all, I think that question in terms of representation and not getting it right or being worried about it is often why collectives exist to begin with. So I just feel like that is sort of a concern for spaces or mainstream that haven't figured it out. And then obviously collectives try to create a space that works. I think the first thing is it's really important to set your intentions and have very clear intentions, and sort of know what you're about and know what you want to do, and be really genuine in your work, because there's something about collectives that requires you to be a little bit radical, and so it just needs to be really sort of really genuine, and you're not going to be able to have open conversations or improve or make a change if you're just trying to get something out of people. And I think listening, it's really sort of quite straightforward, but you need to be able to have a conversation with people. So we're trying to be really, anyone who gets in touch with us will get a response. Unfortunately, when we're a little bit busier, we can't always get back to people the way we want to, but we're always there to respond to people, and there's sort of no sort of generic way of getting back to someone to say, sorry, we can't do this. And so I think people know what we're about, and people know that we're always there if they want to just get in touch and just ask a question. And yeah, it's about listening to really hear what people want and what people don't want. And if you keep trying something and there's no engagement and no one shows up, you need to sort of try something different. But also have conversations. Don't be scared of people. Have conversations with people to just see what is it that people really want. And I think that's something that gets neglected a lot when it comes to, in particular, like exhibition, for instance, and sort of trying to put on events. That often sometimes people will just put on an event for the sake of it, but actually you need to think of the audience and would people feel comfortable attending this and engaging, and can you linger around a bit afterwards to make sure that if anyone has a question, they can ask a question. So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And on that note, I can't speak for the panel, but I will be around outside afterwards, so if you do want to chat about this or anything, feel free. And Trevor, what about sort of the work you were doing with sort of Black Audio? What kind of, it wasn't representation, but sort of when you were trying to work with the community or sort of speak for the community, I don't know how you sort of...
I don't think we would have packaged it in that sort of way, because it depends on what you consider community is. Is it a community of filmmakers? Is it the area that you're located, or a more broader or larger community, international community again? So the artist thing is making the films, getting the films into places where people can see it, being available to have discussions as well. But part of the workshop declaration was that you do workshops, discussion around filmmaking, screenings of film. So even coming to places like this, where the film festivals was going on, and lots of the independent cinema spaces as well, where you would show stuff and then be open for discussion or commentary or whatever. But the job is to make the product, that's the artist's thing, to get the thing there, and then your audience or your community hopefully will be able to rally around it, because if it's not there, it doesn't matter about the community in that sense.
No, that's true. And just to kind of follow up on that, I guess especially sort of in the last, say, sort of 10, 20 years, we've been talking a lot about intersectionality as well, and the idea that there's no, like you were saying, like, what does a community mean? It's not, you can't say people in the northeast of England, say, it's also within that there are different groups. There, again, it breaks down by sort of class, by gender, by all kinds of factors. So I guess my sort of question would be, can we ever represent sort of every part of even one community completely in one project or in sort of a longer series of work? And if we can't, does that matter? Is it kind of more important to get a few accurate representations rather than trying to kind of sum up every potential identity that someone might have?
I think it's ever changing. Whenever you think you've got your finger on the pulse there, does it stay there? In years to come, does it move? So the idea of actually locking it down and saying, well, I'm talking to this community and it's fixed, it may not be that. In a year's time or 2 years' time, a new body of people may rally around that piece of work and see something completely different in it. So trying to sort of pin it down to say, we're speaking on behalf of you, I think it's the hiding to know. I think the best thing you can do is actually be honest about the work you're doing at this particular time and make it available for people to see and discuss it. Trying to sort of control the genie it's a dangerous game out there. But if other people find a way of doing that, then all power to them. But I won't try.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think it's about access to the means of production, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what the workshop declaration was about, and that's why you have such a rich body of work nationally representing it. So it's about, you know, filmmakers wherever they're from. You have to level that playing field out in order to get the variety of stories that you want. So that's ultimately what it's about. And where we're at the moment is, I mean, the work that I'm doing with Amber is about teaching children and young people the means of production. So the agency's coming from them within that process in a way that maybe it's different from how they worked previously. But it's about that, having that ability to create and have control over the creation of what you're doing, whether it's working with a little film crew or a camera, a stills camera that allows that. So it's not. I think the diversity and representation of voices can only happen in the diversity of representation of the means of production.
But also, like, the technology's shifted so much now. Before, you'd be shooting 16mm film that has to be processed, then you have to cut it, and then you know the whole ecosystem of that. Now we've got our phones allow us to be, but then the quality of the things that we're making changes as well. Like, again, as much as the subject matter, but you're enabling people to think about how they can construct the frame and what follows and how the sound is manipulated again. So it's enabling people to take their own agency or urgency to be able to make their own voices heard and to share that information around again. But I think you're right, that's the main bit, was basically saying we have the right to make these images, whatever these stories, wherever they come from. But it's not locking it down and saying, look, it's a fixed story, it's ever changing, it's organic. So, but if you have the ideas and the ability to engage, then that's the tool to
I don't want to dominate. I'm gonna, I showed a clip there from biker, from the engagement in the biker community. So that's a community which has seen huge changes. So all we can do, we didn't document biker in the 1970s, from 1970 to 1977, circa Lisa Continent, when it was demolished, in order to say this is the story of biker. She went back 25 years later and we're like, this is another story of biker. We're not, nothing's ever definitive, is it? We just, you approach it with integrity, with authenticity, with trust, and then say this is what has resulted. And that's all that's kind of all you can do in a way. But I think the key is that we want more people doing it. And we've always wanted that, haven't we?
And I think those are all really, really good points around making and who gets to make films and who gets to sort of be behind the camera. But I think just as important is who gets to see them and sort of in what space. because when you're sort of making films, you're kind of speaking, but then you can be saying really important things, but if no one's hearing it or the right people aren't hearing it, that kind of takes away all the work that you've done. And Nisra, I know you work more on that side of things, the sort of distribution, exhibition side of things. The kind of question that I want to start and sort of with this is, I guess, who do we want to show these films to? So when you're, say, making a film about a specific group, what kind of matters more? Is it those people seeing themselves and sort of being able to engage with the film and the filmmaker? Or actually do we want to say, no, that everyone needs to see this, because we can all watch a film, say, about the people who have more power. Everyone sees that, so everyone should see this film as well. Do we want to kind of go broad and try and reach out to everyone, or do we want to go and say, these are the people who will take away the most from it? And like, how do you kind of see that balance?
Well, I mean, it depends, again, what the project is and the sort of intention of it. And I'm quite wary of like not wanting tape to be educational for anyone. Like, I'm not here to educate people on representation or how it feels to be, you know, this person or this person. That's not what I'm here for. But so our season, But Where You're Really From, is very specific. It's like really specific in terms of who that is for. And of course, anyone can come and watch the film or the films, you know, but it was very much about something that you can relate to. You know, it's about mixed heritage, it's about whether you're a child of immigrant or, you know, you're born in a diaspora. So it's a very, very specific theme in terms of being able to relate to something. And so, you know, of course, you always want a larger audience and, you know, you want to create a space where everyone is welcome. But in terms of specifically the work I do at Tape, it is quite sort of, what does this trigger within you that goes beyond, oh, I learned something new today, which I find, you know, sometimes a little bit icky. Like, depends on what the film is, or, you know, what the conversation is, for people to then come and be like, oh, I didn't realise that this was a thing. Not to say that that's not valid, but, you know, we very specifically wanted to create conversations with people who could relate and had lived experience. Yeah.
But I guess at the same time, the But Where Are You Really From season was here at the BFI, which obviously tries to reach out to, I mean, it is the sort of national film body, so it will try and reach out to kind of everyone and bring everyone in. So was that kind of, what kind of made you want to go for, say, working with the BFI, say, on that, or a national kind of institution, rather than a more, say, having it within Tape, or sort of a more targeted organisation that works with people of mixed heritage?
Well, I think because it's, I mean, this is another thing in terms of collectives, is like, where do you go after a certain thing, after you've achieved something? So Tape has always screened films and hosted events in small alternative spaces where it's like one-off screening, and the themes have often been about mixed heritage and identity, or dual heritage and mixed identities. And so this opportunity came up, and it's really hard to say no to it. Like, it's really, it was one of those situations where you have to remind yourself of what your intentions are, and sort of go, all right, but after that we go back to our little sort of, we retreat a bit. It was an amazing platform, and we got to sort of, again, going back to in terms of taking up space, we got to take up that space for people who possibly hadn't been here before. We got to take up space in terms of what sort of film we screened, you know, how we set the tone. So we, for instance, set the tone by screening a short film ahead of every feature film, which I don't think they've done before. Another thing we did was we curated a short film program based on submissions, which I don't think they've done before outside of sort of festivals. So it's just sort of challenging the idea of but, you know, if it hadn't worked, if we couldn't have done what we wanted to do, it wouldn't have been the place for us. If there was any sort of level of, no, you can't screen this film, or this is not a good idea, or we don't like this, and we need to check, then we wouldn't have done it. But it's because we were actually allowed to do whatever we sort of wanted. And we're now continuing in other spaces. So we're taking that program on tour in alternative spaces, not big institutions like the BFI. But instead, you know, like small cinemas, independent cinemas, and alternative spaces. You know, one of the screenings is going to be in a gallery space, but, you know, we're setting up a screening there. And so it's just about having that balance between, and knowing within yourself and your collective what you're comfortable with. and then sort of recognizing where you draw the line and what works for you.
And Brian, what about you? I know Amber has a gallery and sort of a screening space in the northeast in Newcastle.
Yeah.
Do you kind of see your work as sort of being made, or the work that you support being made for the people of the northeast to kind of see themselves, or would you say, is one of your aims, say, to also, if there's a film, to kind of submit it to film festivals in other parts of the country and the world, or do you kind of see your work as being for that community to consume, sort of, and that being the end game?
Yeah, no, the Amber's work has been about, it's basically been about stories from the northeast that are resonant throughout the world in the same way as Amber is. So the gallery and cinema were originally created to showcase the work that the collective produced, but it then became, as the collective developed, we became part of networks, and then we wanted to bring in the best of humanist documentary from around the world. So it becomes, like a community. That's what it has to be. And I don't know if you know, well, Black Audio Collective and Amber were part of the workshop movement. So, as these things develop, this is what we want to do today. We are producing work in the northeast, but that is resonant all around the world. It's a human experience. This is what we're looking at. So we have a venue in the city of Newcastle, but that's not remotely the story of how Amber's distributed its work in the past. The work has been taken directly to communities all of the time, because there's intrinsic barriers to accessing culture within city centres that and Amber has been based in these communities. So the purpose, I would say, there's always been the artistic purpose that the work is is for anyone to consume across the world, and that's they've had a long established presence internationally and an international reputation for the work that we produce. Specifically targeted local campaigns have often evolved because of circumstances. So, for example, obviously the 1980s was a really turbulent time politically. There was lots of social change being forced through in the northeast, particularly of deindustrialization, privatization, and all of these things were affecting people on a day-to-day basis. And there was a counter narrative from mainstream media, which wasn't being communicated to the communities that were affected, and so that was part of that the impetus to show work in the community which reflected a different story. That was certainly the case around things like I said before. I think Amber set up a current affairs unit to tackle issues like that, and also fed into something called the Miners Campaign Tapes, which were also around at the time, which was a national network of work that was produced to tell different stories from what was happening on the picket lines, etc. So there's many different aspects to that, where you want to specifically maybe show something in a community, but it certainly wasn't the intention for the work, which was very much internationalist in its intention.
And I think something that's come up throughout all of our conversation so far from all of you is how sort of working together shapes these ideas. So I think one of the things that I want to get into is the fact that you've all worked sort of collectively, and how that sort of shaped the kind of work that you've made and the kind of like values you've had in the way you've made it. So I guess I'd sort of like to get into that by asking sort of, why did you think, what was it about working collectively that appealed to you? Because, I think with filmmaking, you'll have a crew and you'll have a cast. What was it specifically about being a collective that kind of being even more collaborative and being sort of collective that sort of drew you to that process? Trevor, should we start with you?
Yeah, I was just thinking of it like I could walk around with a clipboard and look like I was doing something and get away with not doing anything. So that's what I like about collectives, because like you walk around with a clipboard and yeah, been left alone. No, it's the meeting of minds, the collective power of the people, the particular people I was with, that made it was a no-brainer. That the enthusiasm, the excitement, and the depth of information, it was like finishing school for me. It's like a continuation of the college, from the discussions for information, the connections, and it was again directed towards particular projects or particular ideas, and just hanging out and talking about film, talking about cinema, talking about art, music, and it was that blessing to be able to be amongst people that said, yeah, this is good. Something to be excited by, in-house and out on the street, so you could actually feel connected to all this. So for me, it was a no-brainer that the collective was the work model to work with, to actually make stuff happen. Because you shared the load. It wasn't dependent on one
And from the sounds of it, you clicked. It came about quite naturally. You didn't sit about going, I'd like to make a collective. Who can I work with? You kind of found the group, and you kind of all realised at the same time.
I just turned up with the clipboard and started ticking box, and they never realised, 20 years later I was still there.
And Isra, what about you? I know you talked a bit about how Tape was formed, but sort of why did you feel that working as a collective rather than sort of you freelancing and sort of doing some of this work on your own made more sense?
Well, there's a lot to be said about the word collective, because I know collectives are run by one person. I just, the intention is that it's a collective and one day it'll grow. So we started off as two people, and I think the idea was just that it would grow one day, and it sort of has that sound to it, that it's outside of, it wasn't a business, it's not a project, it's a collective, it's something we do. And I think after a year, Nelly joined us, and we are growing, but it's very much as, it's more through creating opportunities. So it's not like we're a collective of 3 people essentially, but we work with a lot of people. We work with a lot of filmmakers that won't necessarily say that they're part of the Tape Collective, but are totally in line with our mindset, and I think possibly feel supported by us. And so I think anyone that sort of knows what Tape does and gets it can be part of it. And so we work with filmmakers quite a lot. A lot of it is sort of about making that work available and seen. But we also work with, sort of people, in terms of like a freelance basis. I think we were quite young when we started it, which is why we had no sort of intentions about, this is the work I'm going to do as a freelancer. I do work as a freelancer now, because it's worth saying that we all work full time. And so Tape is we needed it to be a side thing for it to just be really sort of genuine, and for it to run on passion essentially, and run on like its intentions. And I think in terms of how we work together is we're all on the same page, and we also just adore each other. We're really good friends, and we're really good at sort of it needs to, like I said, like just going back in terms of the BFI season, for instance, it just needs to work for us. And if it doesn't, then we're not going to do it. And we're all on the same page when it comes to, we're all in agreement on the things we want to do and the things we want to pursue. And also we sort of, I think, back each other up in terms of, there was a whole year where I didn't do anything. I didn't even have a clipboard. I literally had nothing. I was like, I didn't do anything. And I said I'm not doing anything because I was working full time. And my son was quite young, and I was like, I'm not doing anything. And I just let everyone know. And then, the other two did stuff. The past year I've done a little bit more, but kept everyone in the loop, because we just sort of try to play. We've been really lucky in the sense that we are just very supportive of each other, and we're very safe. Someone asked me once, how long? I think it was 2 years ago. They said, how long before you just close down Tape? Like, how long? And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't have to be active. It doesn't have to be doing things. It doesn't have to like generate an income. It's just there as a presence. And even if that means that people can look at the things we've done, or that there's a social media post going up, or whatever, or even if it's us just like occasionally meeting up, it doesn't matter because it's not something that has a pressure on it to sort of be a business or anything. Don't know if that answers the question. But.
No, absolutely. And Brian, I know you sort of talked about the workshop movement and that being the roots of FAM, but now it's more established as sort of, I guess, an organisation or an institution even. But how does that sort of, that collective sort of way of working still feed into what you do and how you work?
Yeah, so we started about 12 years before the workshops movement, or roughly, but we're in a different situation now in terms of when the collective was formed. It was an artist-based collective based on the work, and there was a manifesto, a very short manifesto, which was live cheaply, don't tie yourselves to institutions, make work with your friends, and do whatever it is that gets you up in the morning. That's times have changed. Live cheaply was another one which you can't do these days, certainly. But we have the organisation has gone through many sort of different changes, and we're currently a community interest company, and we have a venue which is or two venues. We rely on grant funding, and that is a different landscape. So what we're trying to do, what we're in the process of doing, is the collectivism has always been around the creative output and the creative activity. So it's about making sure that we have roles within the organisation that are able to bring that stability whilst maintaining our sustainability in other things. So not too many people wandering around with clipboards, but that's just one. It's one of those things. In I think that freedom is essential, isn't it? The freedom to be, for everyone to be on an equal plane, for everyone to be committed to a vision. And whoever drives that forward, I think the different projects that Amber were involved with were led by different individuals, and then it was done on a way that the rest of the production followed, and it was done in that sort of consensus way. But yes, it's certainly a different thing today, as we are essentially an arts organisation based on the foundations of the collective, and we're promoting that and taking that forward, promoting collective practice, and we want to actually inspire new collectives in the region, new production in that way.
And we're going to go to questions from you in the audience in just a second, but before we do, I guess a final quick question from me to all of you is, I think we've all seen the sort of benefits of working as a collective. I think you've all touched on that in your different ways so far. And we've talked about how that can sort of help you do what you want and kind of speak with more power and sort of have some backing, and sort of have some clarity in what you want to do. So I think it's really important. I think one of the themes we've talked about as well has been sort of seeing your sort of other members of the collective as your friends first. It's not, you can't put out a job application saying looking for someone to join my collective. You kind of click with them on a personal level. But I guess my final question would be to people sat in the audience who might be sort of interested in the way you work as a collective or want to sort of kind of try it out for themselves. What one piece of advice would you have about kind of working collectively, and that can be like setting up a collective or sort of actually making it work when you've already got one? What would your one piece of advice be, other than just be really good friends with the people you're working with?
I think that's it. It's because it's about trust. With friendship comes trust, and that's what it is for me. there's nothing more. It's more exciting sharing with your peers when you're developing work. It's a real, not more exciting, but you know, it's a real thing when you're on a journey together and you're creating something together, and yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I've got so many points, not just one.
If you do too, I don't think.
I would say, just again going back to like setting your intentions and what the point is, as opposed to just being like, we're gonna do this. Be mindful of money. Like it's not nice, but so when we started 6 years ago. We put in our own money, but that was something we were willing to do. And it wasn't until we got a bit of funding, very small amount of funding last year. So it was 5 years we were just running with our own money, and just I don't know why. But it was worth it for us. And then last year we got a bit of funding. So just to be mindful of that, and sort of what Brian said in terms of if you then go into a CIC and you're starting to get funding, that's a whole other thing. And where, you know, if you're willing to get public funding, or if you want to charge people for things, just to be mindful of it, because things cost money. And I think also trying to recognize what people are good at, like in terms of your collective, and just I think sometimes, and I've heard this from a few people, that everyone just ends up doing everything, which is nice because you're on this journey together, but equally not everyone has the capability to do everything. So there are certain things that maybe one of you might be better off just doing. Yeah.
Amazing, there's loads in there. And Trevor, what about you?
Take it seriously, enjoy yourself, and have a clipboard.
There we go. Yeah, that's how I got this. I kind of just walked in with like, let's post this. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much. I think we'll just go to questions from the audience if anyone has any.
Yeah, it's not, that isn't an area that Amber's ever dealt with, and with, yeah, it's something where I would say if someone had that intention and they brought it, then that's how it would develop. But there's nothing on the table in relation to football at the moment. It's not really a fight, is it? I mean, it's like, you know, Amber based itself in the Northeast and produced work in the Northeast. It was part of the workshop movement. Continuing to produce work is enough, isn't it? I think. So, you know, obviously there are these things are, there are certain London-centric things, but yeah, I think we've really focused on the work that we are interested in creating, and let those things be discussed by others.
Yeah, but I'm very just like, I like to say I don't understand what the problem is. Like I do, not confrontational, but I do kind of try to resolve things by just asking, what's the problem? But I think, like I said, and like everyone said, we are just really good friends. And so I think collectives might be more difficult because there are collectives that grow based on people you don't really know, but they sort of are interested in the same things, and you end up working together and actually kind of it doesn't work out. And so I know that sometimes they say don't mix like business with friendships and stuff, but if you treat it not so much as a business but more as a collective where you want to do this and you're on the same level. Of course there are some people that are always more difficult than other people. Luckily we've not had that situation, and I think that comes from the fact that we just are really good friends and we just want to continue being friends, and our intentions are to create opportunities. We're not here to sort of, you know, we're not here to sort of do anything else other than try to do something exciting that is outside of very serious business, which is like, you know, work or whatever. But I'm sure there's other situations where there's been conflict, maybe.
I think the main bit is being able to talk through the problems and listen. And the one that's awake at the end of that wins. That's the way we resolve stuff, basically. All night, talkathons. And the last one who's awake writes the paper and we go ahead with the project. You just have to talk and work through what the issue is. It depends what the, yes, even in families we have issues. So the key thing is that you recognise you are family and you have to work through it. There's nobody else in town. It's just, you have to deal with it.
I guess it comes back to that point that you were all mentioning about trust and sort of trusting the people you work with and knowing them, so that if they disagree, it's not an argument about their character, but you can just say, oh, I know you mean well, I know you're my friend. So you can just kind of have it out without falling out.
I think there was a famous story within Amber where Murray Martin had a big fallout with the collective and left to work in the fishing industry with one in North Shields with one of the collaborators to one of the films. He left for a number of months, and I think Circa knitted him a jumper, and he was forever Amber. And after some time he came back, but it's with people working so closely and so passionately, it's inevitable, and with so many changes. Well, in developments, the Amber Collective has gone from a relatively small number of people to 20, 30 people on occasions, and so it's inevitable that's going to happen. But obviously, where we are now, we're much more like I said, an organisation. So we have. In 2016, we got a big capital investment for our gallery to make that space fully accessible, and we then had to employ staff, and with that comes responsibilities and governance responsibilities absolutely essential to that role. So we've, like I say, we're in a kind of transitional situation where we're historically known as a collective, but we're in a different position now of responsibility, and there are certain things that come with that.